Right now, there is a team fighting against extremely dangerous squirrels. The information before them is confusing and making it difficult for them to maneuver and fight. Everyone looking at this thinks it's a game, but no, this is their new reality. To understand what happened, let's go back in time a bit. The main character, Shiro, doesn't know when he was brought into this world. After walking around, he realizes this is clearly the world of Akiba. Many others have also been brought here, and this is the game world they used to play. The status screen is still working well, but the logout feature doesn't. He can see the friends list is still active and notices that many of his friends have also been brought here. He discovers his friend Sugu's name and immediately calls him. They agree to meet under a large tree. This is the first time they see each other's real faces, and Sugu keeps calling Shiro dark glasses because his face looks dangerous. It's been a while since both of them played the game, and they don't understand how this happened. Today was supposed to be the day the developers released a new update. They can't remember what happened before installing the update, and when they realized it, they were already here. The feeling is quite real, so this isn't a dream. It seems for now they need to adapt and gather information because they can't return to the real world immediately. Shiro notices everything here is still similar to the game they used to play, so it seems they shouldn't go outside yet because there are surely many monsters out there. The two young men then chat about typical guy topics. Suddenly, Shiro trips and falls. He explains that in real life, he's shorter than he is here, so it's a bit difficult to move around now. Shiro then accidentally meets another friend who was once in his team, Akatsuki, a ninja assassin. When they meet, Akatsuki asks Shiro for a potion to change her appearance because she's female and wants to change back to this appearance. Shiro had long thought Akatsuki was just role-playing as an assassin and staying silent, but it turns out she's actually female. After drinking the potion Shiro gave her, Akatsuki begins a transformation process and becomes a girl to match her real-life gender. That evening, Sugu wonders why Akatsuki didn't just create a female character from the start. She explains that before it was a game, so there was freedom, but now that it's real, she needs to adjust to avoid inconvenience. Akatsuki feels she owes Shiro and wants him to state the conditions for repayment. He doesn't want to accept, but she says she doesn't like receiving favors from others. Sugu keeps saying perverted things and gets kneed a few times. In the end, Sugu decides to invite Akatsuki to join their team as a way of repayment. Seeing that Shiro doesn't mind, Akatsuki decides that from now on, she will follow and serve him as a way of repaying her debt. The next morning, they go to the market to find something to eat and notice that there seem to be more NPCs than before. The food looks good, but when they eat it, it's disappointing and not worth mentioning. Everything tastes the same, no different from damp cookies. Orange juice tastes like plain water. Suddenly, someone named Mary calls Shiro. He leads his team to the area of the New Moon Alliance, where he meets Mary again, his extremely likable older sister figure. As soon as she sees Shiro, she rushes to hug him tightly. The people in his team are no different. A moment later, the second person, Henry, also arrives. She looks more serious than Mary, but in front of Akatsuki, she also falls for her cuteness. The reason for coming here today is to share information, specifically about some basic information they've gathered about this place. First, almost all teleportation gates can't be used, and the situation of being trapped in this game is happening on all servers in every region. Most members of the guilds have already gathered, and the guilds are actively recruiting new members. After the update, the game has also changed compared to when they played before. Another thing is that Mary wants to invite Shiro to join her guild, but he declines and leaves with his two friends. Mary has told her people that Shiro was previously a strategist for a large team, but that team never formed a guild despite participating in events usually reserved for guilds. Now that team has disbanded. At this point, Shiro wonders what would happen if they die here. In the game, when they die, they will be taken back to the Divine Temple, but right now no one dares to try. So that night, Shiro led his two friends to fight monsters to test it out. Since they had all reached the highest level, they still had a certain confidence, but when they encountered a group of squirrels, they still couldn't master the fighting style because they were used to controlling through commands on the status screen. However, Akatsuki fought very flexibly, so Shiro understood and told Sugu to just fight by acting rather than using commands. Now Shiro understood more about this world, and thus, a globally famous game had brought hundreds of thousands of their players directly into the game. Later, this day was called the Great Disaster. The next morning, a person who died fighting monsters was resurrected in the Great Hall. So it seems that in this world, death is not the end. Shiro's group has now become more accustomed to the combat mechanics in this world. However, just being familiar is not enough. They need to practice more to become more proficient. In the evening, Akatsuki asked to go ahead because she wanted to practice some characteristic ninja techniques like night vision and stealth, and this forest was very suitable for practicing these skills. So Shiro decided to use an illumination spell to both light the way and help Akatsuki locate them more easily. The reason the whole group now has to practice fighting is because around this area, the big guilds are gradually expanding and using their power to provoke smaller guilds. Since fighting cannot occur in town because the guards will intervene, solo players or small groups who go out to level up are often ambushed by larger guilds to steal all their money and equipment. Obviously, these types are hated by all players. While walking and thinking, Sugu told Shiro to relax because he looked tense. A while later, they both met up with Akatsuki again. She informed them that there were no monsters ahead, but when they approached a hospital, Shiro noticed someone gliding by. Immediately, Sugu was hit with a foot-binding spell, which Shiro quickly dispelled. Shiro saw 4 figures ahead and assumed they were some of the players who rob other players. They wanted Shiro to wisely leave their equipment behind and go. He would leave the equipment, but only if he was weaker than them, which wasn't the case now. He then had Sugu go forward to tank. An assassin rushed towards him but was immediately bound. Seeing Shiro as the primary target to eliminate, they turned to him, but Sugu cast a taunt spell to force them to attack him instead. They planned to focus damage on Sugu, but Shiro cast spells at them. Although these spells didn't cause much damage, Shiro cast additional spells to bind them all for Sugu to attack. 2 of his spells reduced the enemy's resistance and amplified Sugu's damage. As long as Sugu broke through all the bindings, they would surely die. They told their healer to heal, but the healer had already been put to sleep by Shiro's spell some time ago. The assassin tried to attack Shiro but left an opening for Sugu to hit. The commander called for the 2 mages hiding behind to cast spells, but both had already been dealt with by Akatsuki. She hadn't shown her face from the beginning, and Shiro had realized they had people behind because initially Sugu was hit by a spell, but the 4 visible figures didn't include a mage. The small spell Shiro threw was just to distract them from the fact that their healer couldn't fight. The commander was left behind and bowed to beg for mercy, but he planned to betray them, so Akatsuki finished him off. Sugu didn't understand why this group had to fight so meaninglessly like this. Surely they had nothing else to do in this game. Honestly, Shiro didn't know what to do in here either. The food was bland, levels were limited, and most people who chose peace stayed in town and lived day by day aimlessly. Even Shiro now didn't know what to do. When they returned, Mary's guild informed them that her people were attacked by other players and are currently being helped by a kind person. Now she needs to go to that person's place to pick up her sister, so she will bring 6 people to pick her up and ask Shiro to stay here and manage the guild for her. But Shiro knows that it would take nearly a month to reach the destination, and now if Mary's group goes, he's certain she won't be able to defeat other malicious players. He's also a bit hesitant about going to help her because he knows Mary will feel awkward, but in the end, Shiro still decides that his group will go to pick up the person instead of her. The next day, Shiro's group officially sets out. All 3 used whistles to call horses. After going a distance, Shiro took out the map to check. After rearranging, Sugu informed that Shiro shouldn't feel awkward about intervening in the affairs of other guilds. Just consider this as something for them to do in this world. Shiro and Sugu then took out different whistles. These whistles are used to call bird masters. Only those who were once in Shiro's large team have this item. All 3 then mounted the bird masters, and Akatsuki, experiencing flying high for the first time, was overwhelmed. After 3 days of travel, Shiro's group arrived at a maze. It's still the mission to pick up a little girl to return to the guild. But the reason they can't use bird masters forever is because bird masters only allow them to ride for 4 hours a day. However, those 4 hours are equivalent to 2 weeks of horse riding. The reason they stop at the mountain to cross the maze is because the dragons out there will attack them if they ride bird masters. Going on the ground is also not safe, so they go through this underground maze. This place is quite old, and there are also monsters that are rat people. These are low level, so they know the difference and don't attack them, but if cornered, they will fight back. Seeing the path ahead occupied by rats, the group had to change direction because they wanted to minimize fighting as much as possible. While resting, Akatsuki went to scout the next level and brought back information to Shiro. Sugu was still depressed about the bland food. They couldn't change the taste of this food at all. Even if cooked by a chef, it would still be bland. But the good thing is that the spices here still have distinctive flavors, so they can sprinkle them on food to make it less bland. Suddenly, Mary called and was surprised that all three had gone so far. At the same time, the girl they need to find has now contacted Mary, and Mary informs that the girl is currently hiding with the person who saved her. Meanwhile, the girl Shiro's group needs to find is Sira. Sira is currently in a town and working as a maid in the house of the person who saved her. That person is a cat beastman named Nyan. This town is mostly full of rogue players who bully NPCs, but Sira will soon leave here as Shiro's group is expected to arrive in a few days. Shiro still doesn't tell Mary about the bird masters, and Mary is completely confident in Shiro. But she only wonders why someone like Shiro refuses to join any guild. Mary then went to a meeting of guild leaders. Only 60% of guild leaders participate here, as the rest have declined. Back to Shiro, his group has come to a bridge. Seeing the bridge about to collapse, Shiro rushed to push Akatsuki away, resulting in him falling down. He then dreams about the time he first started playing the game. He was completely alone then, playing by himself and exploring everything on his own. And then the knowledge he had helped him become known to many people. He was asked for help and guidance on how to get this, and that many times he found it very annoying. But until he stepped into that team, he knew these were the people he needed. Obviously, among them was Sugu. He wakes up and finds himself rescued by Akatsuki and Sugu. The three then continue on, and Akatsuki notices that he seems to be really good with maps. He reveals that in real life, he's a programmer who has graduated from university, making Akatsuki realize they're about the same age. Both are shocked because until now Sugu always thought Akatsuki was just a kid. Seeing Akatsuki seem angry, Shiro decides to keep quiet. They then encounter the boss of this maze. There wasn't one before, so this must be a difference in the new update. Although it looks big, its level is still medium, so they can still fight it. Sugu opened with a taunt skill and let Akatsuki attack from behind, while Shiro continued to use spells to bind the monster. As soon as Akatsuki approaches, Shiro adds another spell to weaken the boss and enhance Akatsuki's power. They successfully defeat the boss and open the exit from here. Witnessing this sunset helps Shiro realize that this is the new thing he's been looking for. This will be the first loot they've gotten since playing this game. Meanwhile, a group of players that can be considered ruffians are robbing possessions from NPCs. The ringleader has ordered his underlings to quickly find Sira and that cat and bring them to him. Shiro's group soon arrives at the town where Sira is hiding. All three have heard about that ruffian guild and need to enter the city to pick up Sira, because if they let Sira out now, there's a high chance they'll be discovered by those ruffians. If something unfortunate happens to the point of losing their lives, they'll have to make another trip to pick up Sira. Akatsuki then hides first, while Shiro and Sugu enter the city. Both are quickly discovered by the ringleader and the ruffians, but they haven't done anything rash yet. Shiro has arrived at the meeting point and met Sira, and surprisingly, Nyan turns out to be Shiro's old team leader. When they meet, Nyan understands why Shiro was able to arrive so quickly. Nyan trusts Shiro very much, so he's sure the plan will succeed. Sira knows she's about to go home, but asked if Nyan would come along. He will also go because there's no reason to stay here anymore. Hearing that Sugu is also coming makes Nyan even more assured. They then walk out boldly in broad daylight for those ruffians to see. Obviously, they know this will put them in danger, but as long as they're still in town, the ruffians can't attack yet. But they still lead Sira out of the city gate, and the ruffians have followed to prepare. Sira is scared while the other two remain calm. As soon as they exit the gate, the ringleader is waiting for them outside. Shiro asks Nyan if he can solo the ringleader, and he seems comfortable with it. So Shiro speaks up, asking who's the strongest here to step forward and talk. Nyan sees that the ringleader seems hot-headed, so he tells him to stop being childish and calm down like an adult. He doesn't accept the challenge, so Shiro tells him if he's scared, he doesn't seem like a leader, and the cloaked guy looks more like a leader. Nyan also taunts him about being scared or nervous, causing him to finally accept the duel. He rushes in to fight Nyan. Shiro stands to shield Sira. Shiro informs us that the ringleader has a fighter character class, which fights by using skills with short cooldowns and fast attack speed to prevent opponents from having time to rest and counterattack. But even though Nyan has less health, he still has speed and an unwavering attitude, because Nyan's character class allows him to use dual swords and can continuously apply disadvantageous effects on opponents. So the ringleader soon becomes disadvantaged and decides to play dirty by calling his companions to heal him. They then also plan to gang up on Nyan, but Sugu suddenly appears and taunts all of them. However, Sugu is soon ganged up on and loses almost all his health. So Shiro tells Sira to cast healing spells on both Sugu and Nyan, but focus mostly on Nyan's health. Nyan is then kicked away, while Sugu is forced to use a skill that makes him immune to all damage for 10 seconds, which can only be used once every 10 minutes. The others think Sugu is out of options and has to use this trump card, but as soon as Sugu runs out of steam, Nyan jumps towards Shiro and then dodges as Shiro's skill binds the ringleader. Nyan only needs to strike to break the thorns, which is enough to make the ringleader's health evaporate to 1. Akatsuki has dealt with all the healers and mages in the back. She doesn't understand why the other guy's health evaporated so quickly. She suspects that Shiro used that skill twice just now. Specifically, Shiro's skill has a 15-second cooldown that coincides with the ringleader's skill cooldown, so he must have timed it very carefully to cast 2 skills simultaneously and also took advantage of the time Sugu bought to deceive them. Indeed, all 3 must understand each other extremely well to coordinate at this level. Shiro gives the ringleader a chance to retreat because he left 1 health for him as an opportunity. But he still persists, so Sira gives him a blow that makes him leave for good. He swears he'll remember Shiro's face and take revenge. The 3 then call bird masters and leave immediately. When leaving, Akatsuki seemed a bit gloomy, as she felt insecure about her ability to coordinate with the Shiro group. Shiro had informed us more about the NPCs. They were originally pre-programmed characters, but since the Great Disaster, everything had changed. The NPCs now have personalities like real people. On the way, Sira reported back to Mary at home that they had successfully escaped and were on their way back. Sira, knowing it was now safe, burst into tears and thanked everyone. As it was getting dark, they decided to set up camp here to rest. While the Shiro group was setting up tents, Sira and Nyan went to collect firewood. Nyan spotted a deer and decided to show off a bit. That evening, while everyone was complaining about the bland food, Sugu smelled meat. All 3 went to where Nyan was and saw him grilling meat. Thinking it would be bland too, they tried it and were surprised this was the first time they had truly tasted food in this world. The Shiro group ate voraciously and asked for more. Sira watched, thinking Nyan looked like a mother bird feeding her chicks. Nyan explained how he did it. Previously, they all obtained ingredients and prepared food through the status screen, but abandoning that way of thinking, they now had to gather ingredients and cook directly for the food to have flavor. The Shiro group had tried before, but when they put it on the stove, it naturally melted into black stuff. Nyan thought that maybe they hadn't learned enough levels of the chef profession. Shiro realized he had been thinking in the game's old patterns, and indeed there were still many things he had to relearn. Akatsuki then stood up and introduced herself to Nyan, and so did Sira. The little girl felt guilty for being weak and too dependent on the Shiro group. Sira wondered about how Shiro and Nyan seemed to know each other from before, and both admitted it right away, saying they used to be in the same guild called the Tea Party of Debauchees. The guild was simply people who went together, not a big clan or anything. They had nothing in common but liked to go together and do difficult quests together and obtain high-level items. Akatsuki still felt insecure because she couldn't coordinate with Shiro the way he coordinated with his old friends. They then noticed that Sira seemed to like mature people like Nyan. They guessed Sira's age, and from her behavior, they could guess she was around middle school age. Shiro and Sugu remembered that their guild also had a pair of twins around that age before. Back then, the 2 often clung to Shiro to ask him about information in the game. Because both kids really liked the game, Shiro had used his temporary self-leveling down mechanism to play with the two kids. He noticed their names were still on the list and had seen the two of them on the day of the great disaster. They decided to go find those two kids because they were worried they must be very confused and scared. But Shiro had seen them join a guild, so they should be okay. Sugu ran to ask if the older sister was pretty, but he didn't know because he had only heard their voices and hadn't seen their faces. Besides, he wasn't sure if the voices he heard were their real voices. The next day on the road, the group was caught in the rain, so they had to go to a nearby village to take shelter temporarily. Nyan saw that Shiro still seemed like before, not joining any guild. As for Nyan, he had once participated in a guild of cat character users. They simply lay sunbathing on the porch, but during a windy rainy time, the guild was blown away and disbanded. They then came to a nearby house. The homeowner, who was also the village chief of this place, came out to welcome them and let them borrow the warehouse to stay. Sugu thought the soft hay would be easy to sleep on. Nyan and Sira went to find a stove to cook food. The old man's two grandchildren also came and were excited to see Akatsuki as a ninja. They then heard the story of this village, that in the past, this place was swept by a snowstorm, the children's father went missing, and their mother was sick and being treated up in the mountains. The old man then went out to play with his grandchildren, and Sugu realized that NPCs now really seemed like humans. However, they were the real humans because the adventurers or players were the most inhuman at this time as they could resurrect. Before, they had never noticed there were so many NPCs. Sira and Nyan then brought back a bunch of ingredients so now they can make food. They both tried making a plate of cookies, and the NPCs had never tasted anything like this before. Meanwhile, a group of adventurers is trudging back in the rain. This is just a remnant group because most have died and been sent back to the sanctuary. They are very bitter towards this leader because his level is too high, so he only attracts strong monsters. Moreover, he doesn't have a clear strategy for fighting. When they return, we know this is the guild that the twins had joined. They are all dissatisfied with this guild because these people are practically exploiting the labor of low-level people like them. On the next trip, the younger brother was really missing Shiro when he suddenly heard Shiro's voice nearby. But then the young boy decided to turn back without running over. According to Shiro, the guild is something that brings many benefits. It allows people to share a common storage in the bank, has its own communication system, has the right to buy a guild hall for the group, and can stay there to rest. Since returning, Nyan has passed on cooking methods to Mary's guild, and together they organized a party to celebrate Sira's return. Sira informed Mary that they shouldn't publicize this cooking secret yet, because Shiro said they should keep it a secret. That night, when everyone had gone to sleep, Shiro and Mary cleaned up and then went to have a little chat. Mary was very grateful for what he had done recently, while Shiro asked her if anything had happened to this place while he was away. She informed that there were fewer robberies, public security was better, but the atmosphere seemed more uncomfortable as if people were competing with each other. Her guild has less than 30 people and only a few are at maximum level, while the leading guild in the country has more than 1,500 people and most are at maximum level. Basically, the competition is about which guild is bigger, having more power to dominate. Most hunting grounds are occupied by stronger guilds. Although they are abusing their power like that, the guilds have set a rule that fighting is not allowed while hunting monsters, so the number of robberies or fights has been reduced. Shiro still feels it's not quite right, because the competition has created a big invisible barrier between players. However, they can't impose rules or moral standards on those people. A few days ago, she gathered many small guilds together to share ways to solve these barriers, but each guild had its own petty opinions and no one would yield to anyone, so they didn't get anywhere. In addition, some guilds are aiming for the new level limit in the recent update. However, for high-level people to gain experience, they also have to fight similarly high-level monsters. So those people use a cheating technique, which is using experience potions. Experience potions allow users to increase certain beneficial buffs and double the experience gained for a certain period of time. But experience potions are only given free daily to players below level 30. So a guild has recruited people under level 30 and taken experience potions from them to sell back to large guilds that need it. Shiro then went out for a walk to think. He doesn't know what to do in this situation, and an old teammate told him to try to solve this problem. However, he doesn't know what to do because he doesn't have any guild himself. In the past, he didn't like joining any guild because they only aimed at his veteran status. Suddenly Nyan came and saw that he still had aversion to joining any guild. He knows that the reasons he thinks up only prove that he is arrogant, but it's undeniable that the guild mechanism makes people corrupt. However, there's nothing in the world that doesn't corrupt. Denying that fact is no different from denying one's own existence. Their previous team was also built by everyone's joint efforts, so the treasure should be something that everyone jointly obtains. Hearing the team leader's enlightenment, he understood that everyone had long been by his side waiting for him to change his view on guilds. He then called the older sister of the twins, Minori. He knows Minori's current situation, so he wants her to confirm. The girl was very emotional when meeting Shiro again. He promised to come there soon to rescue both siblings, so she should rest assured. The next day, he met Sugu and Akatsuki again, so he decided to ask for their help. He then returned to Mary's guild to ask for her guild's help in rescuing the twin siblings. They still owe him, so they will help him, and at the same time make that guild that's taking experience potions from new players pack up and leave. He decided to purge this town because it's currently operating in a very petty and dirty way. It used to be the largest town on the server, but now it's very weak. They want to hear what his plan is so they know how to help. First, he needs 5 million gold coins. Everyone was shocked when they heard this. However, what he needs most is people's goodwill. The more people support him, the more likely he is to succeed. Therefore, he asks for help once again, because now he has established a guild for himself, named Log Horizon. Regarding the currency in this world, a normal meal only costs 5 gold coins, staying at an inn is 10 coins, it takes 35 coins for a basic day of living. Just killing 6 goblins is enough for that amount. Therefore, the 5 million gold coins that Shiro needs is too large. Mary's entire guild at most only has 60,000. However, he already has a specific plan for that money. But they also have their own ways to make money. People in Mary's and Sugu's guilds are now capturing wild boars alive, because killing them only drops 2 kilograms of meat, but capturing them alive and processing them will yield many times more. Nyan has trained more chefs for the guild. Mary hasn't left her room for 3 days because of the paperwork, but Henry keeps bringing more paperwork, and Shiro also brings more for her to continue. Henry thinks Shiro is quite ruthless in the upcoming plan. Shiro has Henry completely under control because she likes to be with Akatsuki, so just using Akatsuki as bait, Henry will do it. Akatsuki, who was monitoring the experienced potion seller, suddenly felt a chill. Sugu and 2 boys just brought back the wild animals and were immediately hugged by Mary in gratitude. But this isn't enough yet, so the boy goes hunting again. That night, Mary looked at the remaining paperwork and screamed. She's now completely afraid of people wearing glasses because they're all dangerous people. Based on Henry's recollection, we know she used to be an accountant in real life, so Shiro asked her to help in creating a new money-making mechanism. Because hunting monsters here doesn't work, they will use another way. And when realizing there's a way, Henry said the goal of 5 million gold coins is feasible. Sugu later brought cake to Mary, and she continuously complained about work. He thanked Mary for supporting Shiro's plan, and the plan will start tomorrow. And right the next day, Mary and the girls opened a food shop to attract players to eat. They thought it would taste bland like everything else. Even though they could smell the aroma, they didn't expect much. But trying wouldn't kill anyone. So they tried it and then cried because they could taste the flavors of real life right here. This incident began to spread to everyone in the town. Many people came to buy one after another. They couldn't make enough food to meet demand. Everyone was in a busy state. And so, word of mouth spread, and the number of people who knew about it increased day by day. There were also some who began to send people to investigate. After a few days, they had collected more than 40,000 gold coins. But at this rate, it would take 4 months to earn enough 5 million gold coins, which wouldn't be in time to implement the plan. If they had enough manpower, they could serve up to 10,000 people a day, but their current limited manpower is only enough for 1,000 people. But money isn't the key to this plan. Because the work was done, Henry went to find Akatsuki to relax. Akatsuki couldn't run away because this was the guild's area, so she didn't know the way or the restrictions set up here. She was forced to wear a cute outfit and stand in front of everyone very embarrassedly. Mary didn't know where the blue-haired boy was. Then Sugu said he hadn't returned yet. Just as they mentioned him, he brought back a whole boss wild boar to the guild. He then fell asleep from exhaustion. Nyan regretted to say that the giant wild boar meat couldn't be cooked because the flavor was too strong. Shiro then informed Minori that all his preparations were complete, so she needed to endure a little longer. Shiro then went with Nyan to look at some houses in the town. But now these places can be bought to live in, though the prices are sky high. They later went to meet an old teammate, Saojiru. He had established his own guild for everyone to rely on after the great disaster. He thought Shiro hated him because he had invited Shiro to join the guild, but Shiro refused. Shiro explained his reasons and how he had changed his perspective, and now he needed Saojiru's help. Saojiru admitted that this town now looks like an invisible prison. Hearing that Shiro had a solution, Saojiru immediately agreed because he didn't want to waste Shiro's precious time. He knew Shiro always had good plans that he couldn't understand, so he didn't need to hear explanations. The first thing Saojiru needed to do was help with sales, as he was also very attractive to girls. Shiro felt it was time for the plan to move to step 2. The next day, Mary and Henry went to meet a young man named Ration. This young man had played with Mary before, but since they both had their own guilds, they rarely met. Ration has a guild come merchant guild with 700 members, so he asked Mary what help she needed. She needed to buy some ingredients from Ration, mostly ingredients for food to sell. Ration knew this, so he tried to push the price. But Mary had been instructed by Shiro that if she encountered difficulties, just smile and let Henry handle the rest. Henry knew Mary was about to give in, so she gave Ration a price and told him if he needed to think about it, he could go back first because she was about to meet with 2 more merchant guilds to do business for the upcoming plan. Ration wanted information about that business deal, so he pressed for answers and accepted the price Mary's guild offered for the ingredients. Meanwhile, Minori was still being exploited. She had come to see this world as a terrible place. On the day of the great disaster, she didn't know what to do except sit and cry and wait for someone to come and rescue her. But her younger brother Taoya had accepted the reality. Taoya had become her support here because the little boy seemed very excited about experiencing new things. The fact that they were given experience potions daily made Taoya want to try fighting monsters, and Minori also became bolder thanks to her brother. However, they were quickly beaten by other players and lost everything. Only then did they both remember what Shiro taught about keeping important things in the bank. When they needed someone to rely on, they both met the leader of this exploitative guild. The girl was quite jealous of Shiro because he could take the world for himself, while she could only cry because of her own helplessness. Therefore, she felt she didn't deserve to be rescued by Shiro. Now Mary and Henry have also met with the owners of 2 more merchant guilds. One person is a bit insensitive. The other has a mind like Shiro but lacks courage. Shiro said that they were not allowed to share cooking secrets until an agreement was reached. But they still held the upper hand because the cooking formula was a fat bait that everyone wanted to grab. They have the right to publicize what information and keep what information secret, but they must not lie. Henry had revealed that her guild was having a big strategy and it required their help, and the commander of the campaign was Shiro. Hearing about Shiro, everyone knew how formidable he was, so Henry's words carried more weight, and the condition they needed was 5 million gold coins. Everyone thought that 5 million was the cost needed for a high-level mission of this expansion. Mary had them try pudding made from high-level monster ingredients, so they knew enough to understand how high-level ingredients were needed to make delicious food, and were sure that the profit from it would not be small. After adding and subtracting costs, she needed another 4.5 million gold coins. If only one merchant guild provided it, the balance of power would tilt too much to one side. So she requested to meet all 3 to divide it so that each guild would sponsor 1.5 million coins. But the insensitive uncle was ready to pay all to get the most profit, causing the other 2 sides to speak up to contribute. Meanwhile, the twin siblings both knew about Shiro's upcoming rescue, but Minori thought she was too miserable and unworthy of Shiro's help. Taoya thought Shiro was too amazing and wanted to become someone like Shiro instead of always relying on him. The 2 older sisters had returned and were very tired. Shiro's group brought cakes to nourish them and informed that Shiro had prepared for the next step. Mary's and Shiro's guilds then sent invitations to large guilds across the country to attend the meeting. If it was just Mary, they would certainly not pay attention. But because Shiro was also involved, they all had to postpone their work to attend. Shiro then called the two siblings to inform them of the upcoming plan. Minori decided to change for her brother's sake and accept following Shiro. And so the meeting was about to officially begin. In the game, guilds are usually divided into two types: combat guilds, which are mostly high-level people, and trade and support guilds, which usually make up the majority. This meeting gathered all the guild leaders from the major guilds. Shiro stood up to start the meeting, and everyone still remembered him. Shiro said that the plan to link small guilds had almost failed because everyone was focused on their own benefits, so now everyone thought this meeting would be just like the previous one. But Shiro directly said that this was to improve the situation in this largest town. However, a combat guild had withdrawn because they only focused on fighting monsters and occasionally came back here to sell items, so they didn't care about the situation. The withdrawal of combat guilds from the meeting was something Shiro had anticipated. Shiro wondered where Akatsuki and Sugu were, but Shiro had given them another task. That was to help the children who were being exploited for experience potions daily to escape when possible. Akatsuki would be waiting outside the guild hall door, and if they had any mishaps and lost their lives, Sugu would be at the Divine Temple to wait for them to resurrect and then pick them up. So basically, they just needed to run straight out. Back to Shiro, he said that at this round table there were only 11 guilds left, and he wanted to invite them to the Round Table Alliance. The 4 guilds specializing in combat were chosen because they were the strongest guilds. 3 guilds specializing in merchant activities were also chosen because of their growth, and the remaining guilds at the round table represented other players and smaller guilds. He was just the one making proposals and organizing this conference, because his guild only had 4 people, so it wasn't qualified to participate as a member. Now to the main issue. Shiro had a way to improve public security in this town. He immediately talked about the exploitation of experience potions by some guilds recently. It might not violate the game's rules, but originally this game didn't have anything called rules. The reason people banned fighting in town was just because they were afraid of guards coming to retaliate, so that was just seen as a game mechanism, not a law. Laws are things made by humans and recognized by others. Shiro used the example of the town where they went to rescue Sira as an example of lawlessness there. Shiro's words gradually swayed people, but it wasn't enough to reach a consensus. However, they all thought that even if Shiro set laws, what would he do if some people didn't recognize them? Also, if their large combat guilds didn't accept to follow his laws, what would he do? So he decided to use deterrence measures. He had bought the guild halls of these guilds, meaning Shiro had now become the checkpoint if they wanted to return to their guild. So he had the right to put anyone on his blacklist. To enter or leave the guild hall, they all had to go through this place. The guild's bank was also located here, so this place could be seen as extremely important. So Shiro had the right to prevent anyone in this town from accessing their bank account. That's why people called Shiro a demon. The nickname Dark Glasses was not wrong for Shiro. The twin siblings had now begun to fight back against the exploiters to run out of the guild. They met Akatsuki's group outside, and she informed Shiro that the plan had begun. Others saw that Shiro was threatening them, but laws were set to deter. How he bought this place was thanks to the 5 million gold coins provided by the 3 merchant guilds. They had also received the cake recipe in exchange, and from the beginning, they had no intention of opposing Shiro. During that time, the twins, being behind, hadn't reached the door yet and were blocked by the extortionists. They used magic to rapidly drain the blood of both sisters. Minori had erected a barrier, but it didn't last long, so Taoya had to pull his sister and run quickly out the door. The group inside couldn't open the door anymore as Shiro had put them on the blacklist, but the guild leader had slipped out and caught Taoya. Although he couldn't use magic, he could use brute force to take Taoya's life. At that moment, Akatsuki arrived and informed Shiro that one person was missed, so he read out the name for Shiro to add to the blacklist. He was then expelled from the guild hall and caught by Sugu outside. Akatsuki then took the 2 siblings to a safe place to bathe and clean up. Shiro now had a voice before the council, so he proposed 2 criteria he wanted to change in this town. When he heard that the escape was successful, he chuckled to himself, and a red-haired young man from a combat guild became irritated because he kept laughing and demanded that he reveal what his guild was thinking. A week after the meeting, the whole town had almost changed and became more vibrant than before. Going back to the meeting, Shiro and Mary had announced a method to prepare food with real flavors by cooking directly with skilled chefs. At the same time, the three merchant guilds had joined hands to create steam engine technology, something that had never existed in the game before. This means that now they could race to invent things with their own hands instead of using commands like the outdated ones. Shiro's actions would give players more motivation and goals to strive for, as most players were now bored with nothing to do. Promoting development would give people more goals to earn money and enjoy, and not only would merchant guilds benefit, but earning money by defeating monsters would also be strongly encouraged and bring profits to combat-oriented guilds as well. Regarding rules, Shiro wanted to establish a law prohibiting fighting or bullying low-level players in hunting grounds around the town. As for human rights, he wanted to allow players to freely join or leave any guild they wanted, and the anti-detention and anti-bullying law he proposed needed to be applied to NPCs as well. Because NPCs are now like real people, they directly participate in players' lives and are original inhabitants of this world. If they continue to bully NPCs, there will surely come a time when NPCs rise up against players like them. And so, 10 guilds unanimously stood up to join the Round Table Association. After that day, the guild leaders stood up to announce the contents of the meeting and the cooking recipes. Also, whenever someone wanted to enter the guild hall, they would have to pay a fee of 1 gold coin as tax. As for those who had imprisoned and extorted low-level players, they were imprisoned in the guild hall for a long time, so they escaped by using teleportation commands or stabbing each other to respawn at the temple. They disbanded their guild and left the town. The children who were rescued joined Mary's guild, so she had to move to a larger house. Shiro's group moved to a new house, and Raishin came to let Shiro know that he would hire NPCs to work. However, at this moment, he and another guild leader noticed that the NPCs recently seemed to be keeping an eye on and being wary of them. Surely the NPC faction had begun to take actions that needed to be cautious about. Mary and Henry later brought gifts to celebrate the housewarming. Shiro and an old teammate from the former squad, Nayuna, also came to congratulate. This place had been renovated by the tactless brother of that big merchant guild, and before that, the Black Sword Guild leader had also stopped by to help clean the place for them. The guests later left, and Shiro asked about how the twins were doing, to which Mary only said they were fine before leaving. Nyan then went out to buy ingredients to make curry. The whole Shiro group was visibly excited about curry. Shiro looked at his two friends, feeling grateful that both had followed him from the beginning until now. Nyan later returned with the twins, both expressing their desire to join Shiro's guild. While he was still stunned, Nyan reminded him that he was a leader, so he decided to lead this guild and agreed to let both of them join. After that, the whole guild sat under the starry sky to eat curry. Looking at the results of their efforts made Shiro's emotions swell even more. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of NPCs, or as they call them in this film, the Earth People, the king of this place heard news that the adventurers or players had established a round table conference and immediately had to pay attention. At that time, 2 Earth People were hunting. They didn't trust the adventurers at all because they believed that adventurers only knew how to kill senselessly. As they were about to shoot a deer, they noticed a dark cloud approaching and new danger was coming. Meanwhile, the situation in the town had developed significantly. Everyone had ways to do business and develop. Sugu and Akatsuki were busy training the twins. Shiro was trying to use his abilities to develop ways of drawing up contracts and similar things. Nyan had asked him to try to put work aside for a while to rest. Suddenly, Henry called Shiro to help deal with some issues, specifically that Mary was on strike because she wanted to go out and play instead of burying her face in work all day. Seeing Mary throwing a tantrum like this, everyone was at a loss, but then Shiro came up with an idea, so they organized a training trip for players under level 40. This way, they could both go out and have an excuse that it was work. After discussing, everyone decided to go together. Nyan, of course, would also go as a trainer. That night, the twins decided they must change and become stronger to prove to Shiro that he was right to decide to put effort into saving them both. Although it was called training, Mary and Henry were both excited and enthusiastic about preparing for the fun part. Suddenly, they heard news that a group of people was approaching the town. When they went out to meet them, this group introduced themselves as messengers from the Alliance of Free Cities, located in the east of the continent, and it seemed this place had initially approached the Round Table Conference. They had invited the entire conference to attend a meeting of the Lords next month. Shiro knew this would have both advantages and disadvantages. The advantage was that they would gain more information and knowledge about the Earth people of this world, but the disadvantage was that they might get caught up in the political tricks of the Lords. Now they would gain one thing but lose another, but Shiro wasn't too worried about the disadvantage because the Earth people were inherently weaker than players, so they would still have the upper hand. The next day, Mary's group set out for training. Along the way, the group got to see many sights they had never seen before. They decided to rest at an abandoned school and would have a barbecue party tonight. Unfortunately, Shiro couldn't participate because he had to attend the meeting with the entire conference. Before that, at the meeting, the table had chosen one person from the Combat Guild and one person from the Merchant Guild to attend, but they still needed one more person strong in politics and negotiation. All 10 eyes turned in one direction, so Shiro couldn't escape. When it was time to set out with Shiro, the people going with him were the black-armored, glasses-wearing brother and the tactless older brother from this merchant side. Akatsuki would always follow Shiro, and as a consequence, Henry also went along. On the surface, Henry said she was going along to learn, but Shiro knew full well she was going because of Akatsuki. Shiro knew the Earth people would change quite a lot now. Previously, when the Earth people were just programmed characters, players could do quests for them and receive rewards, the most valuable being this magic bag. But now that the game has changed, new players who don't have magic bags will never have them again. After a while of sightseeing around town, Mary's group had also arrived at the place they were looking forward to the beach. Everyone rushed straight into the sea to soak. Meanwhile, Shiro's group had arrived at this ice castle, rumored to have been created by an ancient tribe. In the evening, the gala dinner-cum-meeting took place. Everyone felt quite pressured. Akatsuki was quite uncomfortable with this gala outfit, but Henry kept praising how pretty it was. The reason Akatsuki didn't like it was because this outfit couldn't hide weapons. The leader of the alliance came to meet the group. The black-armored brother boldly stepped up to introduce himself as Krusty. He looked very aristocratic, which made things easier for Shiro. While Krusty was discussing with the king, Shiro and Henry noticed that most of the nobles didn't dare to approach them, as neither side had any information about the other. Both sides wanted to extract information about the other, but also didn't want to reveal information about themselves. The king then introduced his granddaughter, Lestia, to everyone. As for Mary's side, Sugu announced that the next day they would take the group into the dungeon for a challenge. Everyone was excited until they heard that only they would go, without the trainers, which made everyone suddenly change their expressions. Meanwhile, Shiro's group sat watching the nobles dance. The king wanted them to dance as everyone was paying attention to them. If they didn't dance, it would make the Round Table Conference lose face, but if they danced, the dancer would lose face. Everyone refused. Krusty said he wanted to discuss a few more things with the king, so Shiro was pushed to dance. But he was lucky to have Henry go with him as a dance partner. She knew Shiro couldn't dance, so she would guide him. Henry had a character class of sound support, so she just had to provide the melody for Shiro to follow. They successfully captured all the attention on the dance floor. The children accidentally bumped into Akatsuki, thinking she was also a child, so they invited her to play hide and seek. So she disappeared, leaving only her outfit behind. Shiro was later called by Minori, who was worried about the dungeon trip tomorrow because she was afraid she would be a burden to everyone while the trainers wouldn't be going along. But Shiro asked if she still kept the notebook recording what he taught, because as long as she had that, she would know what to do. He wanted her to realize more things on her own, so he didn't want to teach too thoroughly. The next morning, Shiro's group was enjoying breakfast, and Shiro vowed to get back at them for pushing the dancing onto him. Akatsuki thought he was petty, but he also noticed that Akatsuki seemed angry, so he had something to nitpick back. Back to the main issue, Shiro wanted to know if this group had a chef, because it seemed this palace would need more people to serve as he was sure the noble meeting would continue. The entire alliance of these Earth people generally had about 30,000 people, and their 20,000 players were on one side, so the Earth people would certainly have to be concerned about them. The reason for this meeting was for them to see if the players had any ambitions or plots. But generally, the dance last night had dispelled that thought. Shiro was sure the Earth people were thinking as follows. Before the Great Disaster, the Earth people only needed to pay the players and they wouldn't make any fuss. But after that day, the number of players doing quests had decreased, and now they had established a governing organization like they were doing and were developing very quickly, so they had to quickly pull the Round Table Conference to their side. Obviously, they wouldn't be willing to be subordinate, so they would try to negotiate and buy off individual players or small guilds of the player faction. So how to prevent that from happening? And to make sure Shiro's reasoning was correct, Akatsuki was the person Shiro needed for reconnaissance. Meanwhile, the training group had now arrived at the dungeon, and Nyan had shown them the way to the beginner dungeon and advised them to know their limits before entering the intermediate path. After dividing into teams, the twin sisters went with a girl named Sira, another girl named Isusu, and a delusional young man named Ruddy. This young man was low level, but often opened his mouth boastfully, and somehow still managed to befriend Taoya. Minori wanted to discuss plans but couldn't get a word in, making her feel even more inferior. Before entering, Nyan and Sugu didn't forget to give advice and encourage them to try their best. They then went inside, and Rudy was asked to use magic to create light to help them see the way in this dark cave. Sira could do it too, making the young man think his light was weaker, so he started to show off. But more light was better, so the young man let it go. They then came to a path that split into two directions. The previous group had already gone to the intermediate level, so they would take the remaining path. Minori wanted Ruddy to stay back since he was a mage, but he thought that standing closer would make the magic fly faster, so Minori could only comfort herself that she would support him in time. The group then encountered 3 skeletons. Taoya rushed forward to attack and draw the monster's attention, but fighting too intensely caused Taoya to take damage, forcing Minori to buff his armor. However, buffing should be done right when the monster attacks, not afterward like this, which is ineffective. Sira had to use healing, and Ruddy also used magic to deal with the rest. Isuzu had enhanced Ruddy to cast another spell, making them all feel they were quite in sync. Suddenly, Rudy accidentally blocked an arrow that was shot by a skeleton archer. Taoya had rushed forward eagerly only to be surrounded by 5 skeletons that suddenly appeared. Minori wanted to cast a protection spell, but wasn't quick enough. Suddenly, the skeletons switched to targeting Rudy, causing his health to drop quite rapidly. The group had no choice but to run away together. Meanwhile, Krusty was discussing with a minister when he spotted Princess Lenisha, so he put the work aside to go down and meet the princess. That evening, Krusty informed the Shiro group that he would no longer have to worry about being dragged to those troublesome noble parties because he now had a solid shield. Shiro didn't understand what shield Krusty was referring to. As for the princess, she had just told her maid about Krusty. When he came to find her, she already found Krusty quite annoying, and somehow he seemed to be able to read all of her thoughts. Krusty directly said that he didn't like those noble tea parties, so he chose to get acquainted with her and accompany her as an excuse to avoid those tea parties. The maid wanted the princess to stay away from Krusty because he was an adventurer, and they had no information about those people. The next morning, the princess saw Krusty helping the soldiers train. She went down to watch, and Krusty told her that he just wanted to understand more about the Earth people, but she knew full well that he was investigating their strengths. Krusty still knew what she was thinking, so he deliberately spoke loudly to gather the soldiers. He wanted to make a proposal that they would have a duel, and the strongest person would get to escort the princess. Everyone who heard this became excited. Shiro passed by and understood what shield Krusty was talking about. Akatsuki, while investigating the nobles, was discovered by some children and had to hide to avoid being obstructed. Shiro at this time was also troubled in his own conference because everyone had a very high ego and refused to follow others' opinions. Minori called to ask for more advice, but he was quite busy at the moment. As for Krusty, he had defeated all the soldiers, and the princess was hardly surprised. Krusty then went out with the princess and decided to lie down on a bench to rest. He wanted the princess to try lying on the table too. He let her know that the adventurers were completely free, and to gain that freedom, they all had to have determination. Meanwhile, the young group had fought back and forth many times but still couldn't win. They always lost even though the monsters were clearly lower level. Rudy had blamed the people in the back line. Minori wanted to say something but couldn't get a word in. The trainers outside were still having fun. Suguha wasn't worried about the children getting into trouble, because if the children were resurrected in town, Suguha would drive the birdmaster to pick them up. They then caught crabs to boil, but Nyan only liked to eat small crabs because big crabs were quite bland. Suddenly, Mary saw a wave in the distance and it quickly disappeared. Meanwhile, that insensitive brother was negotiating with a noble. They appreciated that the adventurers had found ways to process food, thanks to which the territories were becoming increasingly wealthy. But there was a problem with transportation due to monsters. He thought they needed adventurers to exterminate monsters, but what the noble needed was sea transport technology. Krusty at this time was attending a ball with a princess. Krusty only talked to the princess. Suddenly 2 young ladies came to talk to Krusty. He led both of them and the princess outside. Both praised Krusty while he only humbly accepted their words. The princess kept looking at him in a troublesome way, but reluctantly went along with his words to make these 2 young ladies leave early. When both of them left, Krusty had let the princess know that he stayed close to her because he had a little sister, and she looked very much like that sister, so he went with her to relieve the weariness in his heart. She reluctantly accepted letting him go with her and extended her hand to Krusty, thinking he would kiss it, but he shook it normally instead. Shiro had now come to find Akatsuki to ask about the investigation results. It was known that although the nobles were still wary of them, most nobles were only half unfavorable towards them, while the other half still wanted to draw them to their side. Suddenly, a magic user came and introduced himself as Regan. Regan had taken both of them to his personal library to entertain guests. Regan knew about the magic bag and how to obtain it. Meanwhile, the young adventurers were planning to sneak into the dungeon again, but Saojiru forbade it because they should know to keep and respect the rules. During this time, Regan had told Shiro about his research on using world-class magic. There were different levels of magic, and world-class magic was the largest, capable of changing an entire civilization. In the past, the world had many different races, but the militarily strong races were weak in reproduction, so they were gradually crushed by the unique race of humans. They became angry and summoned up to 6 vengeful goddesses. That was when world magic was first used. Although the goddesses were soon suppressed by humans, they had succeeded in sabotaging humanity by causing goblins and monsters to multiply. The monsters, having a respawn mechanism, could not be completely eliminated no matter how much they were fought. Then world magic was activated again and brought adventurers to this world over 200 years ago. Shiro's name had been heard for nearly 100 years. Shiro realized that time in the game flowed 12 times faster than in real life, so nearly 100 years coincided with the 8 years since he first started playing the game. The event that summoned adventurers to this world was 20 years ago, when the game officially opened. Shiro then wanted to investigate further because according to Regan, both humans and players in this world possessed an energy called soul. The soul directly affected the player's memories, so each time they died and were resurrected, the player would forget a certain amount of memories. Meanwhile, the young group now decided to enter the dungeon once more, but suddenly Minori realized something. Taoya also vaguely recognized it. Minori, still fearful, had slapped herself to gain courage and stood up to speak. The little girl wanted them to try waiting until the afternoon before entering to see what would happen. The reason Minori gave was that she wanted the group to use today to get to know each other. Although they had been together for 3 days, she didn't know anything about them. Rudy had to start first. The technique he used was creating a magic ball with extremely high damage, which was also his strongest and most effective move. Taoya then introduced that he had a skill to provoke enemies, but the provocation range was very short, so Taoya wanted Rudy to wait for him to provoke as many enemies as possible to one side before launching his attack. Isuzu also let them know about a damage reduction skill she had just learned. Rudy then had to admit that he had been too foolish. So the whole day, the group used to introduce themselves in detail to each other. The next day, they entered the dungeon again and then worked together according to the plan. Taoya would be the one to rush out first to attract enemies. When the enemies were attracted, Isuzu and Rudy would appear to attack. Sarara would stay in a safe corner to observe the timing for healing buffs. Minori would observe the surroundings to keep watch for everyone. When they were sure there were no more enemies, Talia used his provocation skill on all enemies for Ruddy to unleash his attack. Isuzu had used her skill to reduce the monster's damage to make it easier for Talia. As for Ruddy, with just 2 magic and ice moves, he had finished off the monsters. The group officially won when they saw no more enemies, so everyone was happy because they had succeeded. Minori had understood more about Shiro's advice, which was that although conversation was simple, it was extremely effective. During that time, Henry noticed that Shiro had been working non-stop lately, so he looked very tired. She wanted him to take time to rest, but he was now thinking about the things he heard from Regan. Indeed, they still didn't fully understand this world, and whether dying too many times would make them forget the real world. Suddenly, Minori called. From the girl's voice, Shiro understood that the children had come to understand each other better and overcome their problems. After hearing the girl talk about everyone in the team, Shiro chuckled, because the things these kids went through with others might seem normal, but for them, they had to go through a lot to achieve that harmony. Shiro now decided to move forward with a happy mood like Minori's. Isuzu later shared with the 2 sisters that she felt a slight attraction towards Ruddy. That night, Isuzu sat down to talk with Ruddy, and then realized that the reason she was attracted was because Ruddy looked quite like a puppy, not like she liked him as a normal boy and girl would. Isuzu wanted to add Ruddy to her list of friends so that if they had the chance to meet again in the future, but suddenly she couldn't do it. The next morning, the young team leader under Mary, Soryu, quickly ran to the beach because he heard news of monster attacks. The monsters attacking Mary's people on the beach, though low level, came in large numbers. Soryu provided support so Mary could temporarily retreat to prepare. Soryu and his group were gradually surrounded by a large number of fish, but Sugu couldn't come to support at this time because they had to fight with a horde of goblins. Nyan, patrolling in the air, discovered that many more were coming. At the ice castle, Shiro saw someone coming to report to the king about the goblins. Nyan informed that there were thousands more goblins coming, and Mary's group somehow couldn't be contacted, but the young adventurer group had returned and joined forces with Sugu and Nyan. Both sides had contacted both Mary's side and Shiro's side to report the news. So Shiro called for a round-table conference to meet with distant representatives. He informed that currently, across the continent, many places were being attacked by monsters, specifically goblins. On the coast, there were also several hundred. In the forest were goblins from the raiding tribe, numbering up to 10,000, and it seemed the reason for this was the return of the Goblin King. Every 2 years, a new Goblin King would take over. Players in the past viewed it as an event, and only needed to defeat the new Goblin King before he officially ascended to the throne. In the past, it was a common event, but since the Great Disaster, players almost didn't pay attention to it, so this return of the Goblin King could be seen as a stronger event than before. And when the Goblin King ascends, one wonders how strong the 6 unified goblin tribes will be. In the past, they had the Night Order to help in the fight, but now no one knows where the Night Order is. Mary's group and Sugu's group had now gathered together. Mary was very happy to see that everyone was safe. She then went to change into her battle outfit, and Nyan discovered a group of goblins on that mountain. After taking out the map, Nyan noticed that the goblins were heading towards the town near the beach. That place had no walls, so it would certainly be wiped out in one night. But that group of goblins was just a medium-sized group separated for looting, so they could still intercept them. Minori's group also wanted to go help everyone. Isuzu thought they were still weak, but they couldn't just abandon the villagers because they were weak. Minori had asked Sugu's group to be allowed to go along to help. Shiro at this time had brought people to reinforce Shiro, while Shiro had now informed everyone about the price of dying in this world, specifically that they would lose a part of their memory, but how much and about what memories, he didn't know. Krusty had informed them that he had died a few times before, and it seemed the lost memories were about the old world. It could be said that the lost memories were not too worrying, but if they wanted to avoid it, they just needed to not die. But also, don't be so afraid of dying that they don't dare to do risky things. Minori's group was not approved by Mary to go along, but they still wanted to go, so they asked to go on patrol. However, while they said they were going on patrol, they would be ready to rush in to save people if they could. However, they were too late because a village near the town had already been destroyed by the goblins. Talia discovered the goblins destroying a doll belonging to a little girl they met on the road, which angered him and he rushed out to fight. They decided to rush in to save people without needing any reason. They couldn't shamelessly run away and abandon the town. Minori had a plan. They wouldn't focus on saving that town, but would use a different method. Sugu's group had found them and believed that Minori had the freedom to do whatever she liked. They wouldn't stop her, but would listen to the plan she had. Minori suggested that they should strike the goblins preemptively before they reached the town. Sugu then reported back to Mary. Mary didn't approve of letting the kids go fight monsters, but Sugu thought that if they attacked first, the goblins wouldn't be able to attack the town, and they wouldn't be under pressure to protect the civilians. At the same time, being caught by surprise would leave the goblins unable to react, and he would take good care of the kids, so there was no need to worry. Shiro's side heard the report about the plan and knew that they would also have to do something and couldn't just sit still forever. The ministers still couldn't reach a consensus. Some suspected this was a plot by adventurers, but whoever had an opinion should speak up because there were no adventurers in this meeting room. Their only hope was the Night Order, but for some reason, the Night Order had disappeared without a trace. Their garrison fortress was abandoned with no signs of battle. The ministers were considering sacrificing a fortress to concentrate all the goblins in one place and then ambush them there. However, the lord whose territory was being targeted by the goblin horde stood up to object because he didn't want to sacrifice his own territory. The group of young adventurers had now encountered a few goblins. As soon as they charged out, Sira had tied them up and let Ruddy enhance Talia to deal with them. 2 more rushed out, but Ruddy used magic enhanced by Isuzu to finish them off. The whole group was still coordinating very well. Shiro now had a strategy. He knew the nobility would certainly ask for their help, but they shouldn't help too easily, so he would assign several roles for them to play. The princess now heard some ministers discussing asking adventurers for help, but that meant they would owe these adventurers, and they needed to avoid revealing their weaknesses, and they also didn't want to reveal that the Night Order had disappeared. The princess then went to meet Krusty. He thought she should be sleeping at this hour, but although she was seen as lazy, she still had times of worry. The group of young adventurers was now preparing for the next wave. Rudy was excited about the new armor they had obtained from their recent dungeon trip. It only helped increase the power for mages, so the whole group had given it to Rudy. This was the result they had achieved together, so Rudy treasured it very much. The 3 representatives of the round table had been invited to meet with the lords. Shiro knew the other side was waiting for them to speak first, so Shiro stood up and asked directly where the Night Order was now. They wanted to keep it secret, so they were evasive and wanted to ask these adventurers to help resolve the situation. The lord whose territory was being attacked spoke up, saying that the power of adventurers was given by the gods, so they had a responsibility to protect this continent. The merchant's brother, Michai, was indignant and slammed the table hard, saying they had no obligation to help this alliance when they weren't yet members of it. The other lords had no intention of forcing them to deploy troops, but they thought surely the adventurers wouldn't just stand by and watch the continent in danger without taking action. But Michai argued that they weren't animals that the lords could command. Indeed, they could be immortal, but adventuring also meant facing the risk of losing memories. Michai's overreaction left Krusty not knowing what to do. But the princess had entered, and she had come to meet Krusty to ask to go to their town. She wanted to call for a volunteer army, and in return, she would tell them about the missing Night Order. The lords were displeased with her action, but the king overlooked it and wanted her to continue speaking. The princess admitted that the Earth people were much weaker than the adventurers, but they had no right to take advantage of their own weakness to force adventurers like tools. She knew adventurers were free people, so she would go to call for those who wished to help her. The princess then exhausted herself and was supported by Krusty. Shiro decided to hand over command to Krusty to decide. Krusty then took the princess back to the town. Shiro noticed that the princess had truly done what no one else could do, and it seemed that the situation there would really be changed thanks to this shy princess. The princess was later overwhelmed by the bustle of the place. Krusty had to return to the guild for a while, so Shiro and Akatsuki would escort her. She didn't know where to start, so Shiro would guide her. Michai at the castle was bored and didn't know what to do. He saw Saojiro arrive and immediately be surrounded by girls. Saojiru's subordinates looked at this with frustration, but had to restrain themselves because this was work. Shiro had now taken the princess to see around the town and then brought her to meet Rashin. He needed Rashin to find a beautiful Valkyrie outfit for the princess. The children had run to invite the princess to eat burgers. Everyone was delighted because she was exactly like a princess in their imagination. Shiro then returned with the outfit and asked Akatsuki to help the princess change. After that, Shiro brought the princess to meet everyone. Shiro had gathered them and announced that the princess's alliance was under attack, and they would certainly still easily deal with the goblins. But the problem lay in that they would not receive any rewards from this. So if anyone didn't want to participate, they could stay home and abandon that alliance. But he still wanted to let the princess persuade them herself. The princess, wearing the Valkyrie outfit, looked incredibly beautiful. She introduced herself and confessed that her country was in danger. The Night Order had disappeared. She apologized because her council had intended to force them to fight just because they were immortal. This place was also too prosperous, making her unsure what to offer them as compensation. She admitted that she was lazy and shy, no different from a mobile flower vase. But as a princess, she still had an obligation to stand up and protect her homeland. Everyone could feel the princess's sincerity, so they cheered each other on and decided to help her. They had been waiting for big events like this to have something to do, so Krusty decided to be the commander of this operation and Shiro would be the chief of staff. They would prepare in 15 minutes, so everyone should get ready. The next morning, Shiro wanted them to quickly defeat the goblins, because no one knew where the goblins would target after destroying that alliance. The steamship that the Merchant Guild was about to complete had to be used prematurely. Krusty would take people ahead by ship, while Shiro would lead people to set up camp in an area to act as reinforcements. He reported back to Michai to ask him to monitor the behavior of the lords on the other side. Henry had come to report that the king wanted to meet Michai. The king first informed about the lords being divided due to the princess's actions, partly because they thought he was secretly collaborating with adventurers. But now what he worried most about was the safety of the territory. The king apologized for the rude behavior of the lords and their past plots to manipulate the adventurers. He now understood that adventurers had power equal to his entire alliance, so he wanted to establish a peace treaty with them. But Henry and Michai didn't want to decide on this matter and left it for Shiro to resolve when he returned. The princess was now on the ship, worrying about how she had caused chaos, embarrassed her father, and run away. Krusty knew she wanted to make amends, but although she knew what she had done was shameful, she didn't regret it. Because she had begged for their strength, she had an obligation to go along and fight with them. There were so many new things for her since she left the alliance, so she thought of herself as a bird in a cage. She had no political ability, nor any military value. She knew her own value was almost nothing, but she still wanted to protect the freedom of the adventurers. Krusty was about to say something when his subordinate called him to prepare, so he had to postpone meeting the princess. Meanwhile, Mary's group had regrouped with Sugu's team. They had successfully protected the town, and Mary was still quite surprised that the Earth people looked exactly like humans. It was Shiro who had noticed and reminded them about this. At this time, Krusty had stood up to disseminate the plan to everyone. His subordinate informed the princess that Krusty was one of the top 20 most talented commanders among the adventurers. They would also arrange people to protect the princess, so she should please not do anything foolish. Mary's group was now discussing the side where Krusty would engage with the goblins. Krusty's success or failure would affect the safety of this place. Suddenly, Minori approached Sira to ask for a favor. That night, Krusty began to face the large goblin horde. The mages had unleashed a wave of spells to reduce their numbers before letting Krusty lead the charge. Each goblin only needed one strike to be finished. Krusty's techniques also managed to sweep away a large number of enemies. 2 large monsters with quite high levels also came, but Krusty quickly dodged their attacks and countered them in just one strike. The princess noticed that Krusty was fighting with an excited mood, but he still seemed a bit lonely. Shiro's logistics team was now observing the situation and directing the subunits. This logistics team of Shiro's would help the smaller units communicate with each other through telepathic connections, making fighting and understanding each other easier. As the situation was progressing well, Shiro wanted to pay attention to Mary's side as well. If Krusty's forces drove away the goblins, they would surely scatter and attack the small villages, so they needed to corral the goblins into one area. Mary's forces were currently stationed in a town near the sea, so they also needed to be vigilant in case the fish monsters flooded in and passed through Mary to break the encirclement they had set up to block the goblins. Shiro couldn't enter the battlefield yet as he hadn't fully controlled the overall situation. On Mary's side, the twins were on patrol when they discovered a wave approaching. Mary's group quickly rushed over and found a bunch of monsters coming with it. Mary didn't want the children to fight, but everyone begged her permission to fight. Sugu had also advised Mary to change her mind. The situation on Mary's side had been reported early to Shiro. The trainers couldn't enter the battle yet and had to wait to fully recover their energy. Nyan observed the young group fighting and saw that everyone had improved. Talia was stronger, Sira was no longer constrained by recovery and could summon assistants to help fight. Isuzu and Ruddy coordinated extremely well to unleash techniques that, though consuming few resources, brought the most effectiveness. Ruddy was truly a mobile torch, while Minori was at the back observing and distributing tactics for the whole team. It could be seen that the girl was fighting like a second Shiro. Shiro was someone who could foresee the battle situation 30 seconds ahead with an error of only 1%. It could be seen that Minori was chasing Shiro's shadow, and they wondered how many seconds ahead the girl could predict. Suddenly, the alarm they had set behind reported that the goblins had returned, so the whole group rushed there, leaving the trainers to finish up here. Sugu knew they were taking risks, but Minori wanted them to trust this young group. The group then saw that the goblins were quite numerous, but they just needed to gather them together. Rudy had spread lightning to attract their attention, Isuzu cast a slowing spell, and the whole group unleashed all possible techniques on them. When they had completed the task, Minori revealed that she could predict 5 seconds ahead with a 5% error. Currently, she couldn't be like Shiro yet, but would still try harder. There was another alarm elsewhere, so the group had to continue moving. Shiro had informed Mary to hold on for another hour before reinforcements would arrive. Minori's group was now nearly out of energy, and they didn't know how long they had to endure. When they heard that reinforcements were coming soon, they maintained faith that they just needed to hold on a little longer. Suddenly, it started raining, and the goblins along with a pack of wolves came again. The goblins could be dealt with, but the wolves were different. They were faster and more dangerous, forcing Minori to use her ultimate technique with a one-day cooldown to protect her younger brother. Against 2 wolves and a high-level goblin targeting Talia, they would surely lose. Minori had told Talia to stall the high-level goblin and 1 wolf, leaving the Ruddy couple to quickly handle the remaining one. Shiro had previously advised the little girl that when facing numerous and formidable enemies, they should prioritize eliminating the weaker ones first to limit the damage they could inflict. However, before they could act, Talia was targeted first. Sira tried to heal to buy time, but it would take another 8 seconds for Minori's armor creating skill to cooldown. She knew that armor alone wouldn't be enough to withstand all this damage, so Ruddy decided to charge in and grab the wolf to drag it away. After luring the 2 wolves away, Rudy put his hand in the wolf's mouth and detonated his hand armor. The group then rushed over to check and try to resurrect Rudy, but he wouldn't wake up. Isuzu had to reveal the truth that Ruddy was the Earth people. She had discovered this when trying to befriend Isuzu, and had promised to keep it a secret for Ruddy. He had always tried and hidden it from them because he wanted to become an adventurer. Sira suddenly had an idea to try using healing magic, and somehow Rudy showed a reaction, albeit very weak, but it gave them hope. Minori had called Shiro for help at this point. Until now, Minori had never really asked him for anything, mostly just seeking advice from him, but now she was requesting his help for the first time to save her earthling friend. Shiro had to call Rashin to take over his duties for a while so he could attend to this matter. He then called for a bird tamer and started calling Minori's side to inquire about the situation. After hearing about it and knowing their location, he asked Minori to keep reporting the situation to him. He instructed Talia to watch their surroundings for monsters, while Sira and Isuzu should take turns using resurrection and recovery spells every 2 minutes. This method was proposed by him to prevent Ruddy's soul from disintegrating after death, because if it dispersed, there would be no way to save him. According to Regan, there was still a way to save the Earth people if they acted quickly right after the Earthling's death and before the body decomposed. Shiro remembered Rigan's words about world-level magic, so he asked Akatsuki to hold the reins for him for a moment. The princess was then brought to meet Krusty, who was bathing. He asked her how she found the battlefield, and it seemed she had quite a few fans following her now. Someone reported that a new wave of monsters had appeared, so Krusty seemed to have found more enthusiasm to fight. Shiro had now completed his plan and heard that the steamship was about to reach the beach to support Mary's group. He then landed and let Akatsuki ride the bird tamer to seal off this area. Shiro ran over to assess the situation and instructed the children not to tell anyone about what he was about to do, warning that if they didn't keep their word, he would abandon Ruddy. He then used magic to draw energy from the entire group and transfer it to Rudy, because to save a person, both blood and energy needed to be restored. With energy taken care of, now they just needed to use healing magic. But to connect both energy and blood, Shiro had to use another item that allowed Ruddy to come back to life for only 3 minutes. Ruddy was able to wake up and realized he had died. He wanted everyone not to blame themselves because sacrificing in battle was common, but Shiro argued against this, saying that giving up so easily made Ruddy unworthy of being called an adventurer. However, he had a way to change that. He took out a contract for Ruddy to officially become an adventurer. This was like a covenant for Ruddy to officially join his guild and abide by all terms and missions assigned. In return, Ruddy would officially become a free person. Rudy accepted the contract but couldn't hold the pen to sign, so Isuzu helped him sign. When the contract was signed, Rudy's 3 minutes were up, and he could be resurrected at the Divine Temple because he was now an adventurer. This was the world rule-changing magic that Shiro had devised, turning the Earth people into an adventurer. Meanwhile, Krusty's group had encountered a pack of goblin wolf riders, and this pack included the Goblin King they needed to eliminate. Krusty's group picked them off one by one and even summoned a phoenix to assist. Finally, the main dish, the Goblin King, was dealt with by Krusty. The rest would be left for Shiro's side to handle. Mary and Sugu could now rest after a difficult period of fighting. Both had done their jobs very well. As for Shiro, he now understood something. Previously, he saw adventurers as just players like himself, but now he saw them as comrades who would journey with him to new experiences. The next morning, Ruddy woke up in the shrine and met Isuzu again. She gave Ruddy a scolding for being reckless and not listening to her. Rudy promised to listen to everything she said from now on, so she should stop hitting him. A month passed after that, and both the Round Table Conference and the Alliance of Free Cities held a celebration party. At the party, Krusty chatted with everyone and occasionally glanced at the princess, making people think they surely had feelings for each other. Soryu didn't understand why they hadn't completely dealt with the goblins, and the real Goblin King was still alive, hiding in a cave. Nyan thought they didn't need to do that because now the two sides had signed a trade agreement, and the Earth people had also issued goblin slaying quests for adventurers. So as long as the Goblin King was alive, the goblins would remain a source of income for adventurers. This plan had been calculated by Shiro beforehand. Isuzu at this time had also asked permission to join Shiro's guild. Henry went looking for Shiro but couldn't find him anywhere, as he was the chief strategist and should have been present at this party. She then went to search for him. Meanwhile, Shiro was sitting with Akatsuki to work when he heard Henry's voice, so he left Akatsuki there and slipped away. Just as he left, he heard news about a demon festival, so he went ahead. The adventurers at this time were boasting about their achievements, while Nyan and Sugu knew that the fact that death meant memory loss had not been revealed to everyone but only to key members of the Round Table. During this time, Shiro passed by a girl telling stories to children and overheard this story. The girl told about brave warriors stronger than knights and with the ability to be immortal. They had helped the Earth people fight and destroy many powerful monsters. Shiro just thought she was talking about adventurers, so he continued on. Suddenly, the girl told about an adventurer who had died because that person was actually one of the Earth people. The mages had no way to revive that person, so they sought help from the Archmage. The Archmage created a world-class spell to revive that person of the land as a hero like them. Shiro realized the story was about how he saved Ruddy, so he stopped. That girl then left, and Shiro had to go find Rigan to ask about it. Rigan knew that a month ago, Shiro had used world-class magic, and Shiro also thought that it was thanks to Rigan that he knew about it. Rigan informed him that a few days ago, he sensed someone in the west had also used world-class magic. Shiro realized the only place in the west he hadn't checked the situation was the Minami region. From his investigation, that place was holding an event called the Demon Festival that he had heard about. That place was ruled by a guild, and Shiro said the Demon Festival was similar to the Goblin King event, an event that occurred in waves, and surely the Knight's Order was involved in that. He then left, but was discovered by Henry and dragged away. Meanwhile, at the party, the music had started, but no one dared to open the dance, so Krusty went to invite the princess for a dance. As the princess danced, she remembered that her grandfather had told her that requesting help from adventurers was her idea, so she would be responsible for rewarding them. Her grandfather proposed establishing an embassy in the adventurers' town, and she would be the ambassador responsible for maintaining friendship between the two sides. Krusty knew what she was thinking, so he told her that when she got there, she could fulfill her lazy dream without worrying about etiquette. She liked that idea, but still wanted to be cautious because Krusty was a devil who could read her thoughts. At this time, Sira also wanted to be with Nyan, but the little girl was quite disappointed that she couldn't join Shiro's guild while still being a member of Mary's. Nyan had to invite the little girl for a dance. Minori was about to go look for Shiro when she heard some people bad-mouthing him. They thought Shiro had forced the princess to go to the battlefield and other fabrications. Shiro didn't like being at the party, so he went inside with Akatsuki. He noticed Akatsuki seemed pensive, so she expressed that she hadn't been able to do anything on the battlefield. But he said that she had been constantly by his side supporting him, which had helped him a lot. Seeing that she was still hesitant, he proposed inviting her for a dance since he had seen her practicing dancing recently. Both were quite awkward at dancing, so they wouldn't worry about being laughed at by the other. A few days later, the princess arrived at the adventurer's town. As for the fact that death meant memory loss, Shiro only announced it as a rumor. Some believed it, some didn't, so it didn't cause this chaos. As autumn was approaching, Mary started to come up with the idea of creating a festival, and she assured everyone that she had a plan for it. Soon after, the festival was approved, and everyone started working on it. Many people even made models of the princess to sell. Mary prepared a lot of decorations, and her guild also intended to make winter items to sell. Minori planned to invite Shiro to the upcoming festival. Shiro was busy with work when Henry came to see him. She came to see how he was working because she heard he hadn't left the house for days. She advised him to spend time going to the festival with friends, partly because he was a member of the Round Table Conference. He said he would try to arrange his work, so Henry left first. Akatsuki then showed up, bringing red bean cakes for Shiro to eat and also wanting him to rest for a while. They both went outside to eat cakes, and Shiro felt it had been a long time since he had time to relax. Akatsuki wanted to invite him to the festival, but before she could speak, Minori came to invite him first. Akatsuki then ended up competing with Minori to go with Shiro. He then had to think hard about how to resolve this and suddenly had an idea. Minori then went to prepare things when Isusu came to find her. Minori wanted to go with Shiro to a cake-eating contest. If they won, they would have a chance to go to the royal banquet. Minori wanted more people to understand Shiro better because many still misunderstood and saw him as a cunning person while he was kind-hearted. So Isusu decided to help Minori. Akatsuki knew she was competing with a level 2 kid. She was quite angry at Shiro for treating her like a child. But Shiro had promised to go with both her and Minori, so she realized this might be a date. She was confused about what to wear, rummaged through her entire room, but found nothing suitable, so she decided to find someone to help. Henry felt that Akatsuki needed her, so she ran off. Akatsuki suddenly felt a chill, so she decided to find something herself. Akatsuki then went to find Rashin and Maikai to ask for help in finding a suitable outfit to wear. On the day of the outing, Akatsuki had a kimono to wear. Shiro complimented both of them on looking very beautiful. When the shop owner brought out the cakes, all three thought they could easily eat 4 cakes to win the contest. But when the cakes were served, they realized they had to eat 4 whole large cakes, so they started to worry a bit. The cakes were delicious, but Shiro had trouble swallowing because the crowd behind was cursing him for bringing 2 girls. Both girls took turns feeding Shiro. With each bite, Shiro felt more pressure. The killing intent from behind kept coming, making Shiro feel that fighting 12 bosses at once would be less stressful. In the end, Shiro had to go home with a belly full of cake. Shiro had planned to go out more to have fun, but after eating this much, he wasn't in the mood anymore. Minori told both of them to go home first, while she went to buy some tea to help Shiro digest the cakes better. Although they didn't make it to the banquet, it was still fun. That night, Shiro thought about the cakes and felt stomach pain. He called Saojiro to tell him about the eating contest. He wanted to see how many cakes Saojiro could eat. Shiro was jealous because Saojiro was always surrounded by girls, but still managed to be a good guild leader. He thought Nyan and Sugu might even be better guild leaders than himself. Suddenly, Akatsuki came to visit. She thought Shiro would hate cake after today's event. Both of them usually don't talk much, so now they didn't know what topic to discuss. Akatsuki touched Shiro's forehead because she liked doing this. Minori was about to bring tea up but saw this scene, so she left the tea and ran away. She ran to a corner and felt heartbroken when she realized Akatsuki also liked Shiro. She cried and exclaimed that Shiro should belong to her. At this moment, Talia came to find her, so the siblings sat down to talk. She confessed that she really liked Shiro, but Talia had known it for a long time. No one who knows him doesn't like Shiro. He's very attentive like a teacher, so all the younger ones admire him. Of course, Talia still understood his sister's feelings, but nothing had really happened between Shiro and Minori yet, so they should just let things continue as normal. The next day, Shiro's group sat down to discuss what to do because today was only the second day of the festival. The Minori siblings would go play together. Isusu would take the blonde puppy Ruddy for a walk. Shiro thought he would bury himself in paperwork again, while Saojiro planned to be a food safety inspector. While eating, Saojiro saw two young men quarreling, so he went to mediate. Akatsuki noticed that Saojiro was just eating all the time. He constantly joked to tease Akatsuki, making her angry and wanting to skewer Saojiro. He gave Akatsuki a gift voucher so she would have something to do. Each time she ate at a stall, she would get a stamp. When all stamps were filled, she would get a gift. Saojiro then teased Akatsuki again, so she hit him. Akatsuki then saw someone selling souvenirs, so she went to look. Meanwhile, Minori went to Mary's place to ask for tickets to the banquet. She directed Minori to Reinetia to get them. The little girl didn't understand why Mary was hiding in a box. Mary lied that she was doing skincare, but the real reason was to hide from work without being found by Henry. Akatsuki then bought a new hairpin and went to show Shiro, but he didn't notice and told her to go to Henry because he had work and needed to be left alone. Akatsuki sulked and threw the gift she got from the voucher at Shiro. Saojiro just realized his gift voucher had been swapped, so he had another excuse to go eat. Minori had now reached Reinetia, but it seemed he was also busy, so the little girl offered to help Reinetia. Isuzu saw that Minori was trying to help Shiro regain his reputation, because all the good reputation before had been given to Krusty by Shiro, so he had none left. Seeing that the Earth people were having conflicts with adventurers, Ruddy came to help resolve it. Henry had now found Mary. Knowing Mary was tired and wanted to take a bath, she called Saojiro to help with the carrying. She also knew Mary paid a lot of attention to Saojiro, so she called him. Mary went to take a quick bath to avoid looking bad in front of Saojiro. Henry now also realized she was developing feelings for Shiro because he was the best person she had ever met. Akatsuki also came, and Henry told her she needed Akatsuki's help to sell winter items this afternoon. The princess was now organizing the venue for the ball. She felt that Krusty had tricked her again because coming here wasn't leisurely at all. Krusty came to find her, but only saw her trying to organize the ball. She just wanted to do something to thank the adventurers. The two sat down to drink tea together. Minori now showed Reinetia her new profession. She had asked Shiro for advice before and decided to give up the tailor profession and choose the apprentice profession. This profession allows her to copy others' skills, but at a lower level. She believed that using this apprentice profession could help her approach more people and get more good words about Shiro. She did Reinetia's work very well, impressing him. Nyan and Sira were eating when suddenly a troublemaker in the restaurant was about to start a fight. Nyan had to stand up to teach him a lesson. He threw the man out, much to Sira's admiration. Nyan informed Shiro that the arrival of the Earth people had caused quite a bit of chaos for the adventurers. Although the Earth people are divided by class, they are very professional in trade. Adventurers are free but quite amateur. At this time, the Black Sword Knights and Krusty were in charge of security, so they had to resolve quite a few incidents, mostly conflicts between players and the Earth people. Meanwhile, Shiro had come to the fair to see how Mary's group's stall was doing. Akatsuki was trying on clothes for Henry when she met Shiro again. He saw a conflict nearby and went to check it out. A person of the land wanted to buy out all the stock from a stall, but the stall refused. When he was about to cause trouble, Shiro came to chase him away. They opened stalls to have something to do, not for business, so they didn't want to sell everything at once. Suddenly, Shiro noticed it was unusually noisy around, mostly from the Earth people. Minori also called to report that there were many basic errors in the paperwork, mostly from the Earth people. Recognizing this chaotic problem, Shiro immediately told Akatsuki to go get reports for him while he returned to the guild hall to examine the situation. According to Shiro, the town was about to be attacked. He knew he had been careless and let the enemy gain an advantage. At the office, he noticed that in just 2 days, so many quarrels had occurred. It seemed the enemy's goal was to infiltrate and cause trouble to damage the Round Table's reputation. The princess heard that a marquis from the west had arrived, so she would have to receive him as well. The red-haired member of the Black Sword Knights reported to Shiro that the western marquis had just arrived in town. He suspected the Earth people were behind this sabotage, and based on the scale of the attack, the mastermind must be an important figure. It seemed that damaging the Round Table's reputation was also to interfere with their treaty with the Alliance of Free Cities. They couldn't stop the festival, but had to find a way to minimize the damage. He had a way to respond, but not with violence as Akatsuki thought. He then called Saojiro to ask for help with surveillance, as they had to resolve things secretly without letting everything become too public. Taoya also had to go to Reneshia's place to assist. Minori was to continue working as usual and follow Shiro's instructions if any. Minori now felt that Shiro trusted her more. The problems outside were too many to handle completely. Minori thought their job on this backline was not to get too angry and make things worse. Seeing the little girl calmly handling things made Reneshia feel like there was another Shiro here. Shiro still didn't understand the enemy's attack purpose because it was quite chaotic. The red-haired man also had to go out to resolve some issues. But Nyan's side was quite chaotic because the Earth people argued a lot, and they couldn't solve everyone's problems. At the same time, couples were also arguing with each other just because of these chaotic incidents. Shiro and Nyan couldn't see any pattern in these attacks, from traffic jams to causing arguments, and even bribery, false paperwork, and many other things. When Henry and Akatsuki reported 2 more nonsensical cases, Shiro understood that they had no plan at all, simply causing trouble wherever they could, and they had been worried just because of this meaningless purpose. Shiro felt he couldn't do anything with this kind of chaos, but if nothing was done in another hour, there would be big trouble. As Shiro was getting a headache, suddenly Saojiro came to him. He was very grateful to Shiro for introducing that cake shop. He and his group had eaten until the place ran out of cakes. Seeing Saojiro still so carefree, Shiro had a way to counter this chaotic situation. Meanwhile, the Marquis had arrived at the princess's ball. The Marquis began to go too far, looking down on the adventurers as commoners. When someone came close to socialize, they were thrown out. He then touched the princess's hair and began to disrespect the food she had prepared. Shiro had found a way to limit everything, which was to borrow Saojiro's team to maintain order. Because the girls in Saojiro's team had a very strong sisterhood, they could both cooperate well with each other and had a way to solve problems flexibly without causing further issues. And this method seemed quite effective because the Earth people surrounded by girls were less likely to cause trouble. At the same time, they could easily resolve conflicts for couples. Shiro then received news about the situation with the princess, so he quickly headed there and left Nyan to handle things at this camp. He asked Akatsuki to take care of the stage he planned to use for a grand fireworks display. Shiro then arrived to rescue the princess when she was in trouble with the Marquis. The Marquis complained about bringing goods and having sent a letter asking the princess to prepare storage, which wasn't ready. Maikai and Krusty also arrived right after. All 3 said the fault this time was due to the princess's oversight, so they would take responsibility, as the Marquis's letter was sent to them and hadn't reached the princess yet. The Marquis was startled because this letter seemed like he had never sent it, but he remained calm to continue acting. As for the goods, Mai Kai had storage ready to hold everything, so she told him to go ahead and transfer the goods. Krusty hinted that they had uncovered his sabotage plot, making him uneasy and leave. Shiro still needed the princess to follow and help with a few things. Specifically, Mary's group had created a fashion show where everyone had a chance to be on stage. The princess and Krusty were the two most prominent faces. They had the princess sit on this chair and allowed anyone to come and chat with her, an opportunity for the princess's fans to approach their idol. But some people still saw Shiro as a villain who was bullying the princess. Minori came to find Shiro, and he saw that everything was done, but he wasn't sure if that Marquis was the mastermind behind everything. Minori asked Shiro if he intentionally made the princess hate him. He admitted to it because he needed someone for the princess to be close to and also someone to be disliked. He needed that for future plans. But he understood Minori was worried because she feared people would hate him and consequently hate the guild. He could handle that, but what Minori was worried about was Shiro's own feelings when being hated. He had never thought about that before, but he was also grateful that Minori had worked hard. He used to just like acting and getting stronger alone, but now he understood that he needed people around him and the whole world to showcase his talents. He also saw Minori as a role model to pursue, an extroverted person who got along with everyone. Akatsuki overheard the conversation between the two and left. She had never realized the meaning of what Shiro was doing. Although she was always by Shiro's side, she couldn't see the things that Minori had said. That night, Shiro went to meet someone to get information about the Western region. But the person he met was the one who had told his story to the children at the ice castle that he had encountered before. He knew she was Nuriha. She soon revealed her true form, and according to Shiro, she was the owner of the guild that held all the power in the West. When the catastrophe first happened, she went to the West and was sponsored by the nobles there, then used her authority to buy the shrine. She had the ability to manipulate adventurers' lives, so she forced everyone to join her guild. She also knew about Shiro, about how he had performed world-class magic. However, he also knew that she was planning to reactivate the teleportation gates between towns. The reason she came to find Shiro was to recruit him. He knew that the Marquis's attack this time was also orchestrated by her behind the scenes. She didn't tell the truth, but if she did, Shiro would consider her invitation. She revealed that she previously had a very dull life, but when she learned about this game, she met someone who gave her motivation and a desire to conquer. Shiro realized who she was talking about, but she dismissed it before Shiro could remember more. She wanted Shiro to join her because she knew he had found a method to help adventurers return to the real world. Although it was just at the idea stage, she believed that if Shiro cooperated with her, they could really find a method. She knew he didn't have a specific reason to help the people here, so she wanted to become his reason. But he remembered his friends and thought he already had his own reasons. He didn't want to become her ally, but her enemy. In that way, he would fulfill her desire. He still couldn't remember who she was, but he believed he shouldn't follow her. But she left, believing that one day he would belong to her. The next day, everyone started cleaning up after the festival, but Mary's group still had many plans for other occasions. Mai Kai couldn't believe that all this fun originated from just flavored burgers. That evening, Shiro's group gathered together. Nyan wanted Shiro to give instructions more frequently like a true guild leader. Everyone wanted to try hard to help Shiro as much as possible, but first, they should prioritize leveling up. Shiro had set a goal for them to aim for, not to make this continent stronger or to return to the real world, but the real goal was to change this new world, the place that had changed their reality. And the movie ends here.